Killing Them Gently, a supernatural mystery of horror and suspense. Written by Thomas Fincham. Narrated by Stephen Michael Preston. Breaking Them Gently, Episode 3. I blinked once and then twice. I was once again in my Escalade. As expected, Royce was next to me in his pristine white suit, spotless white shoes, and smooth white tie. "I'm surprised you don't get any stains on them," I said. He ignored my comment. "Why do you even show up?" I asked. "I'm here to check up on you," he said in a deep voice. Normally, I found his voice to be soothing, but lately it had become annoying. "Check on me," I said. "Yes, to see how you are progressing in your new life." "Progressing?" I said, irritated. "I used to be Peter Murphy, married with a son. I'm now Alex Weller, without any family, and sleeping in my car. I'm not progressing very well, if you are so interested to know." I was suddenly angry. "My body, Peter Murphy's body, is being kept alive in some hospital." I didn't tell him I had found out it was at Mount Pleasant Hospital. "And I'm running around doing errands for you, hunting and exterminating these things that I never knew existed." "You should thank us," he said. "Thank you?" I was turning red. "We have given you a second chance. You should appreciate the opportunity provided to you. Others would have shown far more gratitude than you have." "If you want gratitude, then you've chosen the wrong guy," I said. "The only reason you're even here is because you need me. I am doing things that you can't do. I have blood on my hands so that you can walk around high and mighty. I never thought angels used others to do their dirty biddings." He was silent. I could tell no one had spoken to him like that before. But I wasn't done. "If you really want to do me a favor, why don't you let me find who shot Peter Murphy a dozen times?" He looked away. He knew he couldn't or wouldn't allow me to do that. He wanted me to keep doing his tasks so that he didn't have to do them. "We had an agreement," he finally said. "Yes, I'm aware of that, and I am doing my part," I said firmly. "I hope you do your part when the time comes." I wanted Royce, my guardian angel, to remember that once I was done with my duties, he would do his magic and give Peter Murphy a new chance at life. Once Peter Murphy was alive and well, I could stop being Alex Weller. I could stop being a detective at the Clayton Police Department and go back to being a detective at the Clydesdale Police Department. I could then go back and resume my life as a husband and father. I couldn't say that everything would be back to normal. How could it be? It just wasn't possible when a loved one had been ambushed and littered with multiple bullets. Where does a family go from there? How do they move on? I don't know, but I knew what really mattered was that we would be together again. Me, Rosie, and Maddie. One happy family. My cell phone rang. I knew, like always, that once I answered it, Royce would take this as his cue and leave. There was a lot I wanted to say to him. There was a lot I wanted to get off my chest. But this was not the time. There would be other opportunities for me to give him, or whomever he was working for, a piece of my mind. I pulled out my cell phone. I listened. "Okay, I'm on my way." When I shut the phone, as predicted, the passenger seat was empty. I shook my head and eased the Escalade out of the parking spot. I stopped behind a police cruiser and got out. I noticed that there were more law enforcement vehicles than there normally were at a homicide. The house looked like it was recently built. It had a triangle roof, large open windows, and the exterior facade was covered in gray bricks. I found Superintendent Brian Davis sipping coffee near the driveway of the house. "Can you believe this house cost $1.1 million?" he said. I nodded. "Yeah, I can see why. It's brand new, and if I had to estimate, it's probably around 2,800 to 3,000 square feet. "What are you, a real estate agent now?" he said. The reason I knew this was because Rosie and I had spent many months scouring through property listings before finding the house we currently lived in. So I kind of knew a little about houses, you could say. "Would you pay $1 million for this?" he said. "Sure, if I could afford it. Are we talking about a raise?" I said. He smirked at me. "In your dreams, Weller. Come, this one's a real eye-opener." We walked up the driveway. "What's with the big show?" I said. "It looks like the entire department is here." "You'll see why." We found Detective Miranda Butterfield standing near the front doors. Miranda was my new, and now trusted, partner. She had saved my life, which in my books meant everything. "How are you doing?" she asked me. I knew what she meant. Our last case nearly tore me to pieces, literally. "I'm managing," I said with a slight shrug. I wanted to sound like I was okay, but in reality I was still coming to grips with my close shave with death. "This one is pretty nasty and gruesome," she said. "You ready?" "Show me," I replied. We entered the front foyer, and right away I noticed something different. The tiles were covered in blood. There was enough of it to create small puddles. Up ahead, stairs led to the second floor. Again, I spotted more blood. It streaked up the steps. "How many victims?" I asked. "We can't be sure," she said. I turned to her. "What do you mean?" "We haven't found any bodies." My brow furrowed. "Whose blood is this, then?" I said. "We're taking samples to find out, but it's quite a lot, and it's everywhere. I'll show you the second floor." We went up the stairs, careful not to step on any blood. Miranda said, "From what we've gathered from the neighbors, it's a family of 4. 2 adults and 2 children, 1 boy and 1 girl. They had recently moved in." "How recent?" I asked. I had noticed moving boxes scattered about. "A couple of days ago, I think." "Why is that important?" I didn't say anything. We went to the first door down the hallway. "This is the master bedroom," Miranda said. The bedroom was spacious with big windows and high ceilings, but the first glaring thing I noticed was the mattress. It was soaked in dark red. When I moved closer, I noticed pieces of flesh and meat mixed with the blood. "Is this what I think it is?" I said. "Yeah, that's the gruesome part," she replied. "I thought I'd seen everything," Davis said from behind us. "But this one takes the cake." Davis was right. This was horrific in so many ways. In all my years as a detective, I had never encountered anything like this. Ever. "It gets worse," Miranda said. "Follow me." We went to another room. This one was smaller, but I could tell just by the decor that it was occupied by a girl. There were a lot of stuffed animals lying around. Posters of teen heartthrobs covered the walls, and the furniture was light blue and pink. "This is the older one's room," Miranda said. "Same thing on the mattress." I caught sight of blood mixed with flesh and meat, and when I squinted, I saw strands of blonde hair attached to the flesh. This was bad. Really bad. "It doesn't get any better," Miranda said, reading my thoughts. "There's one more." "I've seen enough," Davis said, leaving us. Miranda and I went to the last room. The interior told me it was a boy's room. The walls were painted in a darker color. The space was filled with cars and action figures. It reminded me of Maddie's room. Unlike the others, the bed had no blood or flesh on it. I suddenly had a glimmer of hope, but Miranda looked at me and shook her head. "Look inside the closet." I did. There was a pool of blood below the hanging clothes. Miranda said, "Maybe the boy heard screams and tried to hide in here, but whoever or whatever it was got him." I bit my lower lip. It was too much to stomach. Who would do such a thing, and why? "Was anything stolen?" I finally asked. Miranda shook her head. "Doesn't look like anything's missing. The television, DVD player, computer, laptop, or even the cash and jewelry have not been touched. By the looks of it, all the valuables are still accounted for." We went out into the hall. Davis was standing in the corner talking on his cell phone. He shut it and walked up to us. "So what do you think, Weller?" he said. "Any idea what might have happened? You're supposed to be good at stuff like this." I was at a complete loss. I'd never seen anything like it. This looked like something from a horror story. "We need to find the bodies," I said. "Yeah, we know that," Davis said. "Tell us something we don't know." I glanced inside the room and back out into the hall. I saw something. It was a pattern. My brain began putting things together. "There were 3 of them," I said. "3 of who?" "Intruders." "How do you know?" Davis said. "Look at the blood." I pointed. "It goes from rooms, out into the hall, and down the stairs. One grabbed both parents, the other 2 grabbed each of the children. Together they dragged the bodies out." "You sure?" Davis said, making a face. I leaned down near the stair railings. "That blonde hair belongs to the daughter, and I'm assuming the long strand of auburn hair belonged to the mother. Whoever was dragging them didn't care if the victims' heads hit the railings or not. This also tells us that the bodies were dragged by the feet." I could tell Miranda was picturing what I was saying. "But that doesn't tell us there were 3 of them," Davis said. "It could have been one guy." "No," I shook my head. "If it was one person, Then the attacker would have gone after the parents first, and they in turn would have caused some commotion, which then would have alerted the children to run out of their rooms or at least leave their beds. Miranda said, "The girl was still in her bed when she was attacked. I see that, but not the boy. How do you explain that?" She had a good point. I didn't really know. Whoever the third attacker was, maybe he or she didn't react quickly enough, which gave the boy time to run into the closet to hide. I wasn't sure if anything I was saying was plausible, but like all theories, it was only a guess. I moved down the stairs, following the trail of blood. I could see several different streaks, which confirmed that more than one body was dragged down here. The trail moved down the main floor hallway, through the living room, and to the back patio doors. The sliding doors were wide open. I quickly examined them. "There are no signs of forced entry," I said. "Someone let the intruders in." Miranda said, "We're going to dust them for prints just in case." The blood streaked over the patio deck, over concrete slabs, and then over the grass. I stood looking out into the backyard. The grass hadn't been trimmed in a couple of weeks, which was understandable as the new owners had just moved in and hadn't had time to mow it yet. I noticed spots where blood was on the grass, but not beyond that. It looked as if the bodies suddenly vanished once they reached that point. "Is there a way out from the back?" I asked. Miranda shook her head. "No, I don't think so. I had an officer check, and there are tall bushes around the property which don't look to be disturbed. We initially thought it was a burglary gone wrong. The front door didn't indicate forced entry, so we thought the perpetrators may have entered and left from the back, but that was not the case." "Then where did the bodies go?" I scratched my cheek. "They couldn't have just flown away." "In the ground," I finally said. "What?" Davis and Miranda said in unison. "The bodies have to be underneath the grass," I said. "You've got to be kidding me," Davis said. "Does it look like the grass was ever dug up? None of the soil looks like it was ever turned over. Even if it was, do you know how long it would take to make a hole the size of 4 bodies? He was right. But again, my detective instincts were telling me something else. The bodies couldn't have been taken out from the front door. The blood trail told otherwise. This was the only place they could have gone. It was then that I noticed something. In different areas of the backyard, the grass was slightly raised. I counted 4 minor bumps in the ground. There, there, and there. I pointed to the spots. "That's where the bodies are." Davis looked at Miranda, who had also noticed the elevated spots. He then pulled out his cell phone. "It took 8 people and almost 2 hours before we were finally able to find the bodies. When the 2 adults and 2 children were loaded up to be taken away, Miranda turned to me and said, 'Good work, partner.' I didn't reply. I couldn't think of anything else but the family, and how they ended up in the ground 20 feet away from their home. "So, what do you think?" she said. Amanda Vickers had just shown the house to the young couple. It was a 1,200 square foot starter home with 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a finished basement. The house was small in relation to the other houses Vickers had become accustomed to selling, but it was in a prime location. This meant the price was still substantial enough for her to earn a nice commission. "It's everything you asked for," she said. "Close to the city, open concept, newly renovated, and with a private backyard. It has all the stuff on your list." The couple had been beaming throughout the tour, so Vickers was sure she had them. She had already done a background check on the couple, which told her they were more than able to afford the house. Vickers said, "I would make an offer as soon as possible. With the interest rate so low, I'm sure the owners will get multiple offers on the property." The husband looked at his wife and said, "Let's do it." Vickers smiled. "Great." "The Campbells," Miranda said. We were back in the detective division. Miranda was telling us about the family we had just dug up. The father's name was Neil. He was an investment broker. Mother's name was Kathy. She was a homemaker. Their daughter Judy and son Zach were in high school. "Any motive?" Davis asked. She shrugged. "All the people I spoke to loved them. Neil was a star at his brokerage firm, so money was not an issue. They were good people from what others have said. They gave to charity, did fundraisers for their children's school. They were a model family from the looks of it." "There's always something else, isn't there?" Davis said, raising an eyebrow. I knew what Davis was referring to. Behind every perfect or ideal family, there were hidden secrets. Most people always choose to show one side of themselves to the world, and our job as detectives was to find the other side. My cell phone rang. I excused myself. It was Ray, and he sounded hysterical. "What happened?" I said, hoping no one around could hear me. "We have to meet, Peter." Raymond Chan was my best friend from my other life. I had recently surprised him by filling him in on what had happened to me. His reaction had naturally been one of disbelief, but once I told him things only Peter Murphy would know, he was more than convinced. "When do you want to meet?" I said. "Now," he replied. I thought about the Campbells. Their murderers still roamed the streets. These murderers not only brutally killed a family, they also buried them in their own backyard. We had to find them and put them away in order to bring peace to the deceased. But I knew that Ray would only call me if there was an emergency, and by the tone of his voice, something bad had happened. "I'll see you in 10 minutes, I said. I drove like a maniac. I had told Miranda and Davis that I had some family matters to attend to. As I was still new to the division, Davis made no efforts to find out what the matters were. Miranda had only asked if everything was okay. I had told her it was. I spotted Ray's Audi and parked right behind it. Ray got out of his vehicle and approached me. "What's going on?" I asked Ray after he had gotten in the passenger seat. "Something happened at Mount Pleasant Hospital," he said. My heart sank. Did Peter Murphy die? If so, then what would happen to me? Would I have to live as Alex Weller forever? What about Rosie and Maddie? Would I ever see them again? This and many other thoughts ran through my head. "Tell me everything," I said. Ray took a deep breath and said, "Last night at around midnight, a man got on the floor where they were keeping your body. He came with intentions to kill you." My jaw clenched. "There was only one guard outside your room, and from what I was told, he would have been caught by surprise. As the man was approaching your room, a cleaning lady down the hall noticed the man pull out a gun. She screamed. Unfortunately, the cleaning lady was shot for causing the commotion. The guard then fired a couple of rounds, but none hit the man. He quickly disappeared down the stairs." Ray went silent. I looked out the window. Someone had tried to kill Peter Murphy again. But why? My mind was bombarded with 100 different reasons, but one in particular made the most sense. It was the same person who had shot Peter Murphy 12 times. This person was back to finish the job. "Are Rosie and Maddie okay?" I finally said. "They are fine. They weren't at the hospital when it happened." This was a relief. I didn't know what I'd do if anything ever happened to them. It was bad enough that I was living a life that wasn't mine, but to lose them would be the end of me. Only one thought kept me going. One day, we would be a family again. "What did he look like?" I said. "You mean the shooter?" "Yes." "I don't know. The authorities are keeping everything hush-hush. Even the media doesn't know that anything happened. They moved your body somewhere else. I don't know where. I tried asking Rosie, but she won't say anything except that it's someplace safe." I nodded. My mind was still reeling from what Ray had just told me. "Peter, I'm sorry," Ray said. I stared at my hands and then my fingers. I missed wearing my wedding ring. Ray's voice suddenly perked up. "Maybe you can find out more," he said. "You're still a detective, right? You can make some calls and see what the cops know?" Ray was right. Why hadn't I thought of it before? I could use my badge for something other than just solving crimes. I could become Peter Murphy's eyes and ears. By helping him, I was also helping myself. Just because he was unable to do anything, that didn't mean I was too. "Thanks for letting me know, Ray," I finally said. "No problem," he said, getting out of the Escalade. "You take care of yourself, Peter." "I will. Let me know if anything else happens." Amanda Vickers spent the day pampering herself. She had, after all, received a very substantial check from her broker. Unlike some of her counterparts, the real estate profession had been more than kind to her during the recession. She had taken advantage of the lower interest rates by convincing new or previous owners to purchase properties. The money she received wasn't just from commissions, it was also from kickbacks from private financial institutions. Vickers cultivated so-called good buyers, those whose backgrounds revealed stable income and the ability to pay loans back. For bringing potential borrowers that were not risky, the financial institutions paid Vickers a nice sum. Vickers believed in research, and she did a lot of it. She scoured recreational clubs, business soirees, industry conventions, all those gatherings that catered to people with a certain income level. She even hired private investigators to gather information on potential buyers. By the time she approached them, she knew every detail about them. Using that information, she would convince them to invest in the real estate market by either purchasing a home for their own use or for investment purposes. She had even convinced recent buyers to sell their homes and purchase homes that she had lined up for them. It was better to go with her than to be stuck in whatever current mortgage situation they were in. She would say, "The market is always changing. Might as well change with it." Those who stayed put would lose out in the long run. Those who adapted quickly were always a step ahead. She exited the salon where she had received a full body massage, new highlights in her hair, and a complete manicure and pedicure, and she went straight to her black Bentley. The parking lot was half empty, so finding the car wasn't very troublesome. She fumbled for her keys, and as she got near, she suddenly stopped. In the driver's side window, she saw the reflection. Her heart beat faster. She broke into a cold sweat. This was too soon. She turned and faced them. They stared directly at her. The man wore a suit jacket with corduroy pants and dress shoes. The woman wore a light sweater, a skirt that went down to her knees, and long stockings. The young man wore a sports jacket, jeans, and running shoes. They looked as if they had come out of some grave. Their clothes were covered in dirt, and their skin showed early signs of decomposition. Their eyes, in particular, looked hollow and gray. Their faces were shallow and pale. None of them made a move toward her. She looked around the parking lot, and no one was looking at them or her. Why would they? They were not real. They were only a figment of her imagination, she assured herself. "Go away," she said, her voice low but audible. "You got what you wanted. I gave you an entire family." They just stared at her silently. "Leave me alone," she said. "Leave me in peace." That's when the man's eyes turned hateful. He opened his mouth to reveal stained teeth. She saw worms and insects moving around his tongue. The man then screamed. His voice was guttural. He lunged at her. She shrieked, covering her face with her arms. She waited for the worst, but nothing came. She opened her eyes to find people in the parking lot staring at her. She was breathing heavily. She composed herself and quickly got into her Bentley. She drove away as fast as she could. "Everything okay?" Miranda said when I returned back to the division. "Yeah," I replied, knowing full well it was not, but I couldn't tell her anything. In fact, I couldn't tell anyone. I didn't know who I could fully trust, except for Ray. Miranda was my partner, and she had saved my life, but I still didn't know much about her. I didn't want to know. I was only here for a short time. I was gone once my agreement with Royce was complete. Plus, I didn't want her to be involved in whatever mess I was in. She was a good person, a good detective, and most importantly, a mother and a wife. Someone had tried to kill Peter Murphy. In essence, they were trying to kill me. Who's to say they wouldn't come after her? I had a second chance. Miranda might not be so lucky. I would hate for her husband and son to go through what Rosie and Maddie were going through. "Any breaks?" I finally asked. Miranda shook her head. "It looks like we hit a dead end. No one knows how the family was buried in the backyard." Davis came over. "We gotta find something. I just spoke to the chief, and he's not too happy. I'm seriously thinking of putting CJ on the case with both of you. Conrad Johnson and I had gotten off on the wrong foot. He tried to pull seniority on me, which I didn't appreciate too much. Let's just say I shut him down before he even got the chance. I didn't want to deal with him at the moment." "We'll be fine," I said. "Really?" Davis turned to me. "What makes you so sure?" "There is always a logical reason for everything. Just because no one saw it happen doesn't mean it didn't." Miranda nodded. I could tell she too wasn't pleased with the thought of working with Conrad Johnson. She chimed in. "At the crime scene, we can confirm that someone entered the house and proceeded to kill the occupants. Then they dragged them through the house and buried them in the backyard. The question is, how did they get inside the house?" I suddenly had a powerful and overwhelming thought. I only had them when I knew I had hit on something big. I said, "The question is not how they got in, but who let them in." Davis and Miranda waited for my explanation. I continued. The back sliding doors were not locked. In fact, we saw no signs of forced entry. The occupants of the house couldn't have let the intruders in because they were sleeping upstairs. They only woke up when they were surprised by them. If we find who had access to the house, we may be able to solve this case. Davis turned to me. "You got some skills, Weller." I hope so, too. Amanda Vickers sat in her Bentley, tapping her fingers incessantly on the steering wheel. A file folder was opened on the seat next to her. Vickers had gone over the layout of the house several times. She knew every nook and cranny of that house. She had to. She had, after all, sold it to that young couple very recently. She wished she didn't have to do this. They seemed like nice people. But she had no choice. They didn't give her one. Normally, she was able to keep them away after giving them what they wanted. Not this time. They were back, and they wanted blood. Vickers was about to get out when her phone rang. Reluctantly, she answered. Amanda Vickers? Hi, my name is Detective Miranda Butterfield, the person on the other end said. Is this a good time to speak with you? Vickers' back suddenly tensed. Yes. It's about the Campbells. Vickers broke into a cold sweat. What about them? She said. I'm sure you must have heard by now, the detective said. They were murdered in their home. Oh, yes, I heard. Vickers composed herself. It was very sad. I couldn't believe what happened. I have a few questions about them. What type of questions? Vickers asked. You had access to the property before it was sold, yes? Of course I did, Vickers said. I get a set of keys to show the property to prospective clients. Did any of the keys by any chance get lost? Or did anyone make copies of them? It wouldn't matter if someone did, Vickers said. We always advise the new owners to replace all the locks. Vickers did no such thing. The Campbell's locks were never changed. There was a pause. Vickers could sense the detective pondering this over. No matter, the detective finally said. We'll look into this further. Thank you. Vickers' mind suddenly began racing. What if this detective dug deeper and found out that the Campbells never hired anyone to change their locks? What if she talked to her agency and found out that not all keys were returned, particularly the ones for the back patio? Vickers suddenly had an idea. Detective Butterfield, the Campbells were good people. I want to help as much as I can. I'm currently on my way to a house that will be on the market in a few days. Maybe if we meet up, we can discuss this further? Okay, give me the address. I was working on my laptop when Miranda said, I have to go talk to that real estate agent. She sounds very eager to help. Maybe she can help us break this case. Sure, I said. In the meantime, I'm going to talk to the previous owners of that house. Let's see if they know anything. The address she had given to the detective was for a vacant property. The previous owners had defaulted on their mortgage and were forced out. Needless to say, they weren't too happy about being booted out of their home. They made sure to take everything with them, which included the appliances, sinks, tubs, and even the marble island in the kitchen. They also took it upon themselves to rearrange the house, which involved making holes in the drywall, spraying graffiti on the walls, and even cutting all the electrical wires. The bank was unwilling to spend money to renovate the property. They had hired Vickers to find a buyer to purchase it in its current state. In return, the bank would provide the property at a lower price and, if required, provide a mortgage interest rate below market. Vickers had thought about purchasing the property herself. With the low purchase price, she can invest her own money to spruce it up and then flip it, making a nice profit on the way. She was glad she hadn't bought it yet. It would serve her in other ways now. She parked around the corner from a 2-car garage townhome. From the glove compartment, she pulled out a wooden box. The box itself wasn't heavy, but what it held inside was. It was covered in odd writings and scribbles. She got out of the Bentley and moved toward the townhome. It used to be in good condition. Now it looked derelict. The front paint was faded, the mailbox was missing, and even the shutters covering the windows had been torn off. Vickers passed the for sale sign and went around to the back. The gate leading up to the backyard was unlocked. Vickers already knew this. She had surveyed the property multiple times already. Vickers pulled out a flashlight and turned it on. She had learned to keep one on hand in the event that she had to check out a property late at night. She moved the light over the grassy area and then stopped. She was in the middle of the backyard. She got down on her hands and placed the box on the ground. She pulled out a garden trowel and then proceeded to dig a hole. She unlocked the box and removed a plastic bag. From the bag, she selected a small bone. She gently placed it in the hole and then covered it up. She did this 2 more times, digging a hole and placing a bone inside. When she was certain everything was ready, she dropped to her knees and then began reciting words underneath her breath. The words, when heard by a layman, would come across as garbled and incoherent. But they were anything but. They were powerful and, if used improperly, very dangerous. When she was done, she heard a noise coming from the front. It sounded like a car had parked. Vickers knew. It was time. Miranda got out of her vehicle. She checked the address on her phone and then the house before her. It was dark and looked uninhabited. She dialed Amanda Vickers' number again. No answer. She shut the phone and approached the house. The front door was slightly ajar. She reached for a weapon and entered. The hallway was dark. She pulled out a high-beam flashlight. She slowly moved around the house. The interior was in worse shape than the outside. It looked as if it had been stripped of all amenities, including the light fixtures. That explained why there was no light in the house. When she had completed the survey of the main floor, Miranda decided the address Vickers had given her was wrong. She would call her one more time before she left. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation, a one-digit difference in the number of the house, or even a slight variation in the name of the street. Vickers had sounded eager to speak to her. Maybe she knew something, anything. Miranda didn't want to waste that opportunity. An entire family had been brutally murdered, and it was her duty to do her due diligence, even if it meant checking out a wrong address. She heard the ringtone on the other end of the line, but there was something different about it. She pulled the speaker away from her ear when she heard ringing somewhere else in the house. She listened carefully. It was coming from upstairs. A thought passed through her. Did something happen to Vickers? She moved to the stairs. The ringing was more distant now. She carefully took each step with the flashlight and gun aimed before her. On the second-floor landing, the ringing had become louder. It was coming from one of the rooms. Miranda focused her attention on the first room on the left. She pushed the door open and entered. On the floor was a cell phone. Its screen was flashing, indicating an incoming call. Miranda snapped her phone shut and reached down to grab Vickers' cell phone. What is it doing here? She wondered. And where was Vickers? Was she somewhere in the house? She felt movement behind her. Before she could turn, something hit her hard on the back of the head. Miranda fell to the floor and blacked out. The Walbys were an elderly couple. I was in their living room interviewing them. They had lived in the house the Campbells were murdered in for over 40 years. Their 4 adult children had moved out years ago, leaving them with a house that was too big to manage. It was time to downsize, and they did so by selling the house to the Campbells. They seem nice, Mrs. Walby said, wiping her eyes. I can't believe it happened in our house. Mr. Walby nodded stoically, but I could tell he was shaken up too. I can't believe someone did that to those poor children, Mrs. Walby said. She then broke down. Tears flowed freely down her face. Her husband put an arm around her. I didn't know what to say. I knew what they were thinking, though. What if this wasn't targeted, but a random act of violence? What if they had still been living in that house? Would they have been the unfortunate victims of being in the wrong place at the wrong time? The Campbells could have been. It was my job to find out. Do you know anyone that might have wanted to harm you? I finally said. They both shook their heads. Mr. Walby said, We've been retired for years. We don't have any quarrel with anyone. I can't think of one person who'd want to hurt us. I really can't. I nodded. This was a dead end. I thanked them and got up. Mr. Walby walked me to the door. If you think of anything else, please call me, I said, offering my card. Mr. Walby took the card and said, I didn't want to say this in front of my wife, but I think this might interest you. What? I asked eagerly. It's about the real estate agent the Campbells had hired. What about her? I'd seen her name before, he said. Wait here, I'll show you something. He returned with a laminated sheet. It was an old newspaper clipping. I have a hobby of collecting articles on unsolved murders. I started keeping them when I used to be a reporter for a small newspaper. Anyway, when I heard the name Amanda Vickers, my ears perked up. I went through my files and found this. I quickly read the article. 15 years ago, Amanda Vickers' mother, father, and brother had suddenly disappeared. Police had suspected foul play as 3 graves were discovered in their backyard. The odd thing was that no bodies or skeletal remains were ever found. The police had initially suspected Amanda. There had been many incidents where the police had shown up at the house because Amanda had been violent and threatening. Amanda's mother had said in a statement to the police that she believed Amanda was capable of anything, even murder. At that time, the police had not taken this seriously, but after her family's disappearance, they focused on Amanda. After many investigations with no evidence linking her to their demise, they finally had to drop the case against her. Their file was never closed, but no active work had been done in recent years. The Vickers were not officially murdered. They had merely not been found. If any information was discovered to the contrary, their case would be reopened. Until then, it lay unsolved. My mind raced back and forth. It then stopped at Miranda. She had gone to speak to Amanda Vickers. I quickly dialed her number. Miranda opened her eyes. She had a massive headache. Pain shot through the back of her head. She shut her eyes tight. She tried to remember what had happened. She remembered picking up a cell phone from the floor and then something hitting her from behind. She was sitting on a chair. Her hands and legs were bound to it. She twisted her wrists, but the restraints cut into her skin. She was in the kitchen, facing the backyard. The backsliding doors were open. A cool breeze hit her face, causing her to shiver. She looked around, hoping to find something she could use to free herself. Then something caught her eye. It was in the backyard. At first, she wasn't sure what she was seeing, but she quickly realized what it was. Fear coursed through her body, shaking her to the core. A hand was protruding out of the ground. A second hand tore through the grass. Then a head slowly came out from below. Another hand shot out from the ground, this one 2 feet from the first. Miranda wanted to scream, but her voice was stuck in her throat. A man came out from the first hole, followed by a woman from the second. Behind them, a boy slowly emerged from the ground. They all stood staring in her direction. The look in their eyes revealed that they were hungry. Miranda tried to twist and turn, and in doing so, she fell sideways. Her temple hit the ground with a loud thud. She felt dizzy, but knew she couldn't allow herself to pass out. She had to find a way to get out. She had to somehow close the backsliding doors. To her horror, they moved toward her. Their steps were slow but steady. As they got closer, Miranda noticed that they were dirty and grimy. Their faces were shrunken, their skin a grayish color. They looked like creatures from a nightmare. This wasn't a dream, she told herself. This was real, and it was happening to her. They entered the kitchen, the man first, followed by the woman and the boy. "No," Miranda pleaded. "Please leave me alone." The man's face was twisted, and she saw jagged teeth. It dawned on her that this was the end. They were here to kill her. "I didn't do anything," she yelled. "I have a son. Please!" Tears rolled down her face. She was sobbing, begging for her life. The man was not 5 feet away from her when she heard a loud noise. "Miranda!" the voice said. It was Weller. He emerged from behind a door. His gun was raised high. The man turned toward him. His face did not change. It was when a woman appeared behind Weller that the man's face changed. Even the woman's and the boy's face turned vicious and vile. They screamed. They moved toward Weller when Weller pushed the woman in front of them. They jumped at her. They grabbed her arms, legs, and even hair. She wailed, but they didn't let go. They dragged her across the kitchen floor, through the grass, and then to one of the holes. Right before their eyes, all four disappeared below, and then the hole closed itself as if it had never been disturbed before. Miranda listened intently as I told her Amanda Vickers' story. When I finished, she said, "So, those things were her father, mother, and brother?" I shrugged, not sure myself. "How did you find me?" she asked. "The GPS on your phone," I said. "When you didn't answer, I located it. I didn't realize that it led straight to Amanda Vickers." "She must have taken it from when she knocked me out," Miranda said. "I persuaded her to bring me here, and I guess once her family saw her, they wanted revenge." Miranda rubbed her temples. "It keeps getting weirder, doesn't it?" I knew what she was talking about. Each case was more bizarre than the last. "I'm going home," she finally said. I looked over at the hole where Vickers had disappeared. "Leave her there for now," Miranda said. "She deserves to spend some time with her family." He was back inside the large room. The man behind the desk was clearly not happy. "Carl," he said, "you have twice failed to finish Peter Murphy." "I made a calculation error," Carl said, rubbing his shaved head. "It won't happen again, I promise." "Where is Peter Murphy now?" the man asked. Carl hesitated, but he knew lying to the man was a fatal mistake. "I'm not sure," he said. The man went silent. He then said, "No matter. We have people working in the police department. Use them and find him. If that doesn't work, find his wife and son. Make them tell you." A menacing smile crossed Carl's face. This has been Killing Them Gently, a supernatural mystery of horror and suspense. Written by Thomas Fincham. Narrated by Stephen Michael Preston. Copyright 2019 by Thomas Fincham. Production copyright by Thomas Fincham.